cornfield. He told himself it was wind in the stalks, nothing more. But the sound had shape, and it carried a tune the way a bottle carries a ship. It rose up from the edge of the north field just before midnight, thin and certain, 3 notes first, then a run, then a pause, that felt like a person making room for breath. The night in Story County, Iowa, was the kind that makes a kitchen window into a mirror. He stood with one hand on the sill, the other around a chipped mug, and the whistling kept at it, unafraid to be heard. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time is it there? This was late September 2015. The day had been warm, sky rinsed clean after a brief storm, gravel roads drying into their usual rattle. The farm sat a mile and a half south of Nevada, east of the Skunk River, where it hooks like a lazy elbow. The corn had gone that heavy, dull gold that means the grain is ready and the husks are sick of holding on. In the house, the bedside clock down the hall said 11:52. On the porch, a moth bumped the bulb, reconsidered, bumped again. Merritt Dow listened and felt his scalp move, the way skin does when a memory gets up and looks at you. He had heard whistling most of his life, but not like this. His father had been a whistler when he repaired the sickle bar, when he checked the tension on the auger belts. His grandfather, too, walking the rows with a plug of tobacco and a tune older than the tractor. Merritt could place a tune by county if you gave him a night and a jar of iced tea. This one, though it didn't belong to any porch or station wagon, it had the small brightness of a fairground and the old soul of a hymn, mixed wrong on purpose and still somehow right. He set the mug down, pulled on his boots without bothering with the laces, and stepped into the porch light. The whistling came again, 3 notes that stepped down like someone walking off a train. He clicked off the switch. The yard went honest. The gravel drive was a gray river. The corn made its tinny rain sound whenever the breeze remembered its job. To the north, the trees along the fence line held their breath. Merritt had a habit of heading toward curiosity as if it were a calf out past the fence that needed fetching. He took the flashlight from the hook, the heavy kind with a rubber grip, and checked the batteries the way a person checks their pulse. He told himself this was neighbor trouble, or a kid from town testing bravery on a Friday dare. He told himself this was what the night does to grown men when sleep holds them by the elbow and then lets go. He told Dinah, the old collie, to stay. She licked once, turned in a tight circle on the porch rug, and stayed. He crossed the yard, past the big maple that had survived lightning by pretending it hadn't happened, and stepped onto the headland by the north field. The first row took him in like a store's door chime. The stalks were tall and dry, leaves bent into knives. The ground was soft from last week's rain and held his boot prints as if for reference. He waited for the whistling. It came from farther in now, or the rows had changed the way sound bends when it's forced to choose a path. He chose a path. He took row 18, the one that ran with the slight slope and the way water teaches roots to drink. His father had run the planter careful this spring, GPS straight when the signal behaved, by eye when it didn't. Row 18 should have held like a rail. The stalks pressed against his sleeves. The flashlight beam drew clean wood into the dark leaves, bleaching white, silk like old hair, dirt a puzzle of last year's husks, and this year's pennies of mud. The whistling stopped. He stood still. His breath sounded like someone else's in the mask of leaves. He tasted dust. He listened until listening felt like a rope he had to keep from dropping. Farther north, down toward the low spot by the drainage tile, it started again, only louder, as if the person had turned their head and decided the audience was worth the effort. Merritt moved. 3 rows over, the tram line cut across, a packed strip where the sprayer had gone in June. He took it. The corn arched overhead, leaves flicking his ears. Spiders had slung long theories between stalks. He broke them and apologized in his head. He had walked this ground every day for months, and the ground had said yes like a friend. Tonight, it felt like a cousin, a person who loves you without being sure what to do with you. He reached the low spot. The field dipped and turned its face toward the tile that ran down to the ditch. The air was cooler here, lined with the smell of black earth that keeps secrets for centuries, because that's what it was paid to do. The whistling had gone softer. A trill rose up like someone trying to make light of an apology. Merritt swept the flashlight sideways. The beam caught the blue reflection of something small and glassy. He crouched. A marble. Blue, with a pale ribbon curled inside, half under a leaf. He touched it with one finger and felt the way glass feels when it learned patience waiting inside a pocket for its chance. He stood, and the beam hit another, green this time, lodged at the foot of a stalk. He put them both in his shirt pocket without thinking which pocket meant past and which meant present. "Hello," he said. The field appreciated the effort, if the small answering hush meant anything. He wasn't the kind of man who called out names into a place that did not have names to call back. He was the kind of man who waited and then took one more step, the way you do with cattle that have decided the gate is optional. He took one more step. The ground had a memory. His boots sank an inch, then two. He pulled up. The mud let go with a sound like a low laugh. The beam found a scuff in the soil that wasn't his. It had rained the day before, a polite rain that brightened the world and left. Tracks should be fresh. This mark had a sharpness to it he didn't like. He aimed the light again. The scuff came to a point. Not deer, not raccoon. A toe of a boot slid sideways and corrected because the body above that boot had decided to remain upright. The field held that story and did not mind telling it. The whistling kept on. It moved east. Merritt moved too, allowing the rows to push him into the old waterway nobody planted because it cost more to argue with a ditch than to go around. He hit the bank and paused. The sound was close enough now to feel the mouth that made it, the slight wet at the end of notes, the breath through teeth. Above the ditch, on the fence line, a scarecrow leaned into the moon like he had been invited. Merritt had dressed him in a flannel shirt in July to keep the birds from laughing outright. Now the shirt's checks looked like an argument. The hat had blown off sometime in August. The steak had a twist in it the way wood does when it was alive and insists on a personality after. The scarecrow whistled. Merritt's body did not move in the way of cartoon men. He did not jump. He did not fling the light so hard the beam went to the stars. He stood, the way a person stands when what he sees insists on being nothing but what it is. He put the light on the scarecrow's painted mouth. The paint was flaked, the smile wrong on purpose. His father's old gloves were nailed to the crosspiece, fingers bent into permanent work. The straw at the neck had learned the shape of wind and refused to unlearn it. The tune came again from behind the scarecrow, clipped by fence wire and field. He played the beam along the fence. This line had been his grandfather's. His father had repaired it across 3 winters, one staple at a time, using a hammer that had bent 100 nails and 100 more. Tonight, a single strand lay loose between posts, a neat cut at shin height made by someone who liked clean work. Beyond the fence, the other place. Neighbors in the country are closer than people in town and farther away. The acreage to the east had belonged to the Kesslers once, then to the bank, then to a man who installed irrigation pivots with a speed that made the county whisper. Then it's Saturday. The pivot circle kept a gargoyle symmetry in the daylight and turned to bones at night. The whistling came from inside that circle, not far, an invitation or a dare. Merritt climbed the fence by habit and dropped into the tall, ragged grass beyond. His flashlight skipped over metal. The pivot tower rose where the corn had been cut early for silage. A ladder led up to a catwalk that had not been used since a summer of drought and cheap diesel. The sky put someone else's stars over everything. Under the ladder sat a cooler the color of a toy, lid askew, ice melted into a cold thought. 2 bottles lay on their sides. The labels had lost interest in staying on. He touched one. The glass was warm, warmer than the air deserved. He called out again, a different word this time. "Friend." The whistling answered with the same run of notes. He followed the sound around the base of the pivot. His light found Cobb's nod down to the spindle by raccoons with principle. He found a folding chair with only 3 of its 4 screws willing. He found a playing card gone into the dirt, face down forever. He did not find a person. The corn from the other side rustled, a polite cough. He turned. A taller shadow leaned out from where 2 rows had been pushed apart. The flashlight found denim, boots, the hem of a coat cut square. A hand. The skin had the tint of rural men, year-round, sun-washed, wind-scoured. The fingers were long and still. The hand did not wave. "Evening," Merritt said. He stepped closer. The shadow stepped back. The hand slid into the rows, as if hiding from a photograph. The whistling receded down an aisle of stalks, clean and straight as a hallway. He went after it. Later, he would say he never chose to follow, and he would not count that as a lie. The rows insisted. The sound invited. The night did what it always does when a person leaves a safe light and enters a place built to fit bodies only one at a time. It made a mouth and decided whether to swallow or to speak. The field spoke directions in leaves. He followed until the path tried to teach him regret, and his feet refused to be taught. At the heart of the pivot circle, the ground sank another foot. He stumbled once, caught himself against a stalk so dry it cut his palm in a clean straight line. He swore, quietly, with vowels only. The whistling had slowed. It drew out a single note and hung it in the air as if asking him to name it. He named it Unkind. He turned off the flashlight. Dark held him like water does when you slide under and open your eyes. The field went black, then not. The sky had its thin light, the stars arranged their patient omissions. The rows were no longer alleyways, exactly. They were sentences. A breeze moved through and added commas. He stepped forward into a word, then another. The whistling stopped. He waited. He could hear the pivot tower creak, a metal thought adjusting. A truck moved way off on County 18, 3 miles at least. Tires with thick voices, a man's radio too loud in the cab because the night drives its price down for everyone. He waited until the waiting was its own problem. He reached for the flashlight. The beam hit denim again. Close. A shoulder. He yanked the light up and met a face. It was not a face he knew from today. It might have been a face from a photograph under glass at the county fair, past names, eyes poured in. The hat was the wrong cut for now and the right cut for when hats were more than hats. The eyes adjusted to light with the slow patience of a barn cat in a doorway. The mouth held a shape that wasn't a smile and wasn't what comes later. The cheeks were hollowed in, the way working men's cheeks sag when they finally let the day have them. "Don't," the man said, not loud. He lifted one finger the way a teacher does when she'd rather not get stern. "Don't shine." Merritt lowered the beam to the man's chest. The denim had a tag that read, "Kessler in faded thread," as if a mother had stitched it when mud was the usual weather. The man nodded, brief. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled the run again. The note slid under the leaves and came back altered by straw and distance. "Had to see if you'd come," the man said. He did not offer his name. He did not ask Merritt's. The field did the introductions it believed in. The man tipped his chin toward the north, where the ditch had cut a new curve 2 springs ago, and nobody called the county because sometimes you let water take responsibility for its own choices. "Come on, then." They went up Row, across the tram line, down again. Merritt kept the light aimed at boots and dirt, the way you aim swear words when children are sleeping in the next room. The man's hands brushed the tassels as he went, leaving no sound. The field learned him and forgot Merritt in the same breath. They crossed into the neighbor's back 40, and the soil changed, darker and more confident. The rows had more to say here. The whistling would come and go like a small animal, checking the air and disliking it. The man stopped at a patch where the stalks had been storm-bent and then righted themselves out of pride. He crouched, hand out, palm down, on top of a flat stone that had no business on this ground. The stone was square. It held an iron ring in one corner. He tapped it. The sound returned like a jar lid. "Used to be a storm door," he said. "For the root cellar. They built the house up there." He flicked his eyes toward where the stars thinned and the silhouette of a ruined chimney picked its teeth on the horizon. "Tornado took it in '54, you know that." Merritt nodded. He had heard the story. The county leaned on that year. It changed the way people believe in roofs. 3 days after, the man said, setting his palm to the stone like a pledge, "My brother thought he heard whistling here. We believed him because he was the kind of boy who told the truth, even when it meant he had to walk back and fix something. He followed it. Everybody followed it. Men with boots and women with cakes and ropes and tubs and a feeling of the back of their necks being breathed on. We pulled the stone up, we brought lanterns. It goes under like a snake down there. The cellar does. We didn't find anyone. No boy, no breath. Just apples rolling, because that's what they do when people die. Things keep their job anyway. We closed it back up. Weather put a shoulder on it. And now, he stopped. The whistling came, this time from under their feet. It rose up through the stone like a trick, thin and mean and a little proud, a tune that went square, then wandered off the edge. The iron ring shook against its socket with a burr. Merritt felt the hair along his forearms ask for a vote. Now, the man said, it calls people here when it's time. He put his hand on the ring. I'm tired of it calling people here who are not me. He lifted. It did not rise much. The hinge had rusted itself into religion. The man looked at Merritt, not pleading, exactly, not persuading. He looked like a person offering you the end of a sentence the world has been running too long. Merritt set the flashlight down on its base and got his fingers under the corner. The stone was heavy-hearted, more weight than mass, the kind of weight that comes from being asked to hold back a story. They lifted together. It rose an inch, then two. It settled on a ridge of broken brick. The smell answered before the dark did. Apples, old and bitter, work that had gone on without supervision. Cold earth that had kept promises by crushing them. A draft moved across Merritt's knuckles. It took his body down a list to be sure each part remembered what stand means. The whistling ran up inside the gap and out. It had volume now. It wished it had a throat. It would have stopped if someone had blessed the night right then and said, go on to sleep. No one blessed the night. Merritt and the man held the stone a second longer, then eased it down onto a stick propped like a tired knee. The gap held. The dark inside threw itself at their eyes and bounced back, patient. They did not aim the flashlight in, the man would not have it, and Merritt knew enough to trust someone who belonged to a place this much. They listened instead. The whistling ran its tune twice, then twice again, and each time the final note sagged, as if asking someone to let it lie. Why me? Merritt asked. He wasn't offended by the question. He wanted a reason that could wear a hat. You were the one who heard it honest, the man said. You stayed at the edge of your field as long as you could and still came. Some men run because they want a story to tell about themselves. You came because you wanted to know who to go fetch. Merritt shoved down the part of himself that softened at that. He bent, slid his hand into the gap until his fingertips touched the dirt at the lip. It was cool, the way a basement never loses January. He searched by hand, careful for glass. Nothing but pebbles and the slow grind of last century's lessons. The whistling faltered. It shortened itself and became 3 notes, those 3 notes he had heard at the kitchen window, the 3 his father had bent into the radio between ballgame innings, the 3 his grandfather had used to call a dog that never needed calling. He withdrew his hand and stood. The man had his head down, listening as if his bones were the receiving equipment. He began to hum, not the tune, but a harmony low and uninsistent. The whistling slowed. The cellar air came up wetter than before, fouled for a second by something like breath, and then clean. The whistling stopped. They waited a full minute, then another. Merritt counted, slow, as if a child in a tent had asked him to promise monsters were on vacation. The ground under the stone was a fact again. The man let his harmony stop, the notes settling like a bird on a line, and then choosing not to stay. He knelt and pulled the stick, and the stone met its ledge with a sound like a chest closing. Sometimes, the man said into the calm, it wanted an argument. Sometimes it wanted somebody from back then to say his name and make a promise. It wanted a mother crying on the dirt. It wanted men with rope because rope makes everyone feel helpful. Not tonight. Tonight you came and you didn't carry any of that. You just listened harder than the field wants you to. That's enough. They stood together in the rows until the night got bored with them and went to do what the night does in other places. The pivot sighed and remembered it had bearings, not opinions. The ditch water moved on its way, not fast, not slow, never wrong. A coyote put a sentence into the air and another answered, and both sentences agreed to end where they did. The man tipped the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing and turned back into the corn. His boots made no more sound than a thought that knows its limit. Merritt found his way to his own side of the fence. The cut strand had not healed. Fences need hands. He climbed and dropped into dirt he had paid for with 3.5 decades of rain and frugal Sundays. The scarecrow leaned the same way. His flashlight picked out a nail that had worked proud where a glove met wood. He tapped it back in with the handle, the small sound a hope. On the porch, Dinah lifted her head and thumped her tail twice. He sat on the steps and watched the sky unspool its last thin silk. The clock over the stove in the kitchen read 1:42. A local freight passed through town without asking anyone's opinion. The night had its usual old chair smell. Merritt took the marbles from his pocket and rolled them in his palm. He did not take them in the house. He set them on the porch rail, 2 small moons that decided to belong to weather again. He slept in the chair by the door with the light over the sink left on because he was still old enough to do what his father had done and still young enough to want a reason for it. In the morning, his neighbor from across County 18 pulled into the drive with the casual angle of men who do not use turn signals because everybody already knows where they're going. Otho Vale had the kind of face that had learned to tolerate sunlight and other people's plans. He stepped out, looked toward the north field, then at the porch where the marbles caught the first slant. He paused. "Thought I heard it last night," Otho said, as if they'd been in the same dream and had already agreed on the parts to keep. "I didn't come. I was afraid if I went, I'd bring the wrong thing with me. You go." "I went," Merritt said. He poured coffee into a cup that had chipped the day his daughter drove away, with her car full and her eyes wider than they had any right to be. He handed the cup down. "There's a stone out there. You know it." Otho nodded. "Been there longer than you and me combined. Some things are a door, and some things are the breath you take before you knock." They sat without sitting, Otho leaning on the post, Merritt half on, half off the iron chair that had belonged to his wife's aunt, and squeaked like the first word of gossip. The morning took the night apart and put it away neatly. The field did what fields do after an event. It pretended nothing had happened and invited you to harvest. By 10, the co-op truck rumbled up, the driver wearing the resigned cheer of a man who deals in averages for a living. Merritt walked the headland with him, pointed at moisture readings that lied slightly, agreed to pretend the numbers were written on a blackboard by someone with authority. He did the work. He did it until the work forgave him for wondering what else he might be supposed to do. That evening, he repaired the fence where the strand had been cut. He pulled it tight and stapled it with his grandfather's hammer because you use the tools that know your hands. He hammered in 3 staples and left one in his pocket so the fence would remember there is always one more job and it can't get cocky. He checked the pivot base out of courtesy to the machine. He replaced nothing. He spoke to no one. The sky went red behind weather stacked to the west, Kansas doing its job of sending clouds as if on purpose. For a week, the field behaved. The wind laid down its sheet music neatly. The coupe truck counted out grain like blessings. He slept at the proper times and did not wake to odd hours with the feeling of someone whistling at the edge of his life. The marbles stayed on the porch rail until a grackle knocked one off and it rolled into the peony bed and took up residence there like a kindness. The other slid into the pocket of his jacket and made friends with a nickel and a screw. On the 9th night, just after the 10 o'clock news told its last hurries, he heard the 3 notes again quiet, like acknowledgement, not summons. He walked out to the north edge and stood with his hands in his jacket, listening. The breeze had a bite, the first hard frost would be soon. He unlocked the gate at the lane and left it open for an hour, for no reason at all anyone else would endorse. He closed it again out of habit and walked back slowly, because a person should walk slowly sometimes or the land will feel cheap. He did not go back to the stone unless the sound asked, and it did not. He did, however, leave a small jar on the porch rail next to where the marbles had Saturday. It held nails, the good kind, old, with heads like pennies. Every day when he came home, he put one in his pocket, and every day when he went out after supper, he took one back to the fence line and put it in a coffee can under the scarecrow's torn shirt. Nobody told him to. He liked the weight exchange. He liked that fences need reminding and that the world is not improved by a man who ignores a slack line because his thoughts are more interesting. October reached both hands across the month and pulled. The trucks came and went. The harvest went well enough that he stopped thinking about what could have been if it had rained 4 more afternoons in August. He slept, he woke. The whistling did not return in any way that made him leave his chair. He began to tell himself he had imagined a portion of it, as a man will do when a thing does not ask for money or apologies. Near Halloween, his daughter called from Cedar Rapids, a night shift at the hospital, voice folded with fatigue and the kind of joy that remembers to leave room for the day. He told her about the fence and the harvest and the brakes squeal on the auger wagon that he had decided to live with until January. He did not tell her about the cellar. He would, maybe, when she brought the little boy down for Thanksgiving and they stood by the ditch and talked about frogs like a miracle. He would, maybe, if the field asked them both. In late November, after the last corn went into the bin and the bin talked in its sleep, the county put on its winter color. The field showed ribs, the ditch showed its honest bottom. The wind took one of the scarecrow's gloves, and Merritt did not replace it because some things are beautiful at half done. He walked every line of his ground one afternoon with the sun low and the temperature willing. At the fence, by the pivot circle, under the coffee can where he had been giving the fence its nails, he found a small thing. A train ticket for a child, maybe, not used, edges scrolled by, damp and patience. The print read, Nevada to Ames, 2 bits. He turned it over. On the back, someone had written 3 notes the way some people know and others never will, little ovals marching up and down a ladder of lines. The ink had migrated slightly into the paper, the way memories do in older heads. He put the ticket in his pocket with the nickel and the screw and the marble that had refused the peony bed. He looked toward the stone without moving his face much, because a person does not want to give a field reason to brag. He said thank you into his jacket as if the cloth were a helper. He walked home. Winter did what it does. It scoured the county down to the essentials. It made the roads into suggestions and the kitchen into a chapel. It put the sound of the furnace into his bones and the number of snow shovels in the garage into a bigger argument than necessary. The whistling came once or twice in a blow that turned the mailbox into a hooded thing, and when it did, he stood at the window and let it be. The way you let a neighbor sing one verse of a song you only half like because he is your neighbor, and you hope the reverse is also true. When spring returned, hesitant and then reckless, he walked out to the stone once in daylight. He stood there like a person does when he's about to open a letter he has already read. He put his hand on the iron ring, and the ring chose not to move. He felt only cool metal and the idea of a door. He said the name of the boy he thought must have once practiced whistling there, not loud, not soft. He thanked the man with the Kessler tag for nothing and for everything. He went home and planted, because that is the part of the story a farm writes to remind itself the ending belongs to the ground and the beginning belongs to the same. If you ever hear 3 notes carry clean from a field at midnight, and you are the kind of person who can tell the difference between wind and a message, remember this. The first step into the rose is a promise. Don't make it if you intend to perform yourself for the dark. Bring only your boots, your breath, and your willingness to be the person who will go fetch, not the person who will tell about fetching. Don't shine your light straight into old places unless someone who belongs to them asks you to. Lay your hand flat on what needs closing. When a tune that has wandered too long finds its last note, let it. When a door that has been heavy learns again how to rest, do not hire that door for different work. There are states where cornfields wear their ghosts like belts. There are ditches whose water knows the names people set into it. There are stones that have been held down by weather and held up by stories. There are men who can whistle and men who cannot, and both kinds do well if they listen. And sometimes, in a county that owes as much to wind as to family, a man with a flashlight and an old dog asleep on the porch will follow a tune into the rose and come back, having left something that doesn't need his hands anymore. When he sits down again, the chair will squeak in the key the field prefers. The kitchen clock will softly argue with the refrigerator about seconds. The night will soften him on its slow wheel. The next day, someone will wave on County 18 without lifting a hand, and the answer will come back exactly right. And somewhere beyond the line where 2 quarters meet under a fence, a stone will find it easier to be a stone because 2 men lifted it once, together, and then set it down the way the land asked. The hotel room that prints receipts at 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the keycard and the 2-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12, room 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957. Comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini-fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged in her mouth as if they were items on a parts list. Quill stood behind the desk with a pen balanced across his knuckles like a small seesaw. Room 5B printed receipts at 2:17, she said, like a person reporting a minor plumbing miracle. She slid the strip across, he read it, eyes moving left to right once, then again slower. He did not touch the paper, as if touching would make him complicit in whatever time wanted. He leaned in. You know how old buildings have old anchor points. You hang a new painting, but the wall still remembers the nail. He lowered his voice. That room was a manager's office back when this place was the Francis Motor Lodge. They kept a ledger in there, typed out receipts on a half-width machine bolted to the desk. At close, they printed a roll of check-ins for the night, tore it, and rubber-banded the strip to the hardback ledger. Quill tapped the counter. Once, twice. I've heard the story since I was a kid, but the machine in that room was long gone when the Scissortail bought the building. That, he nodded toward the strip, is a thermal ticket printer from the last decade. We put it in to spit bar tabs during wedding weekends. He smiled without humor. The bar's downstairs. He told her what he knew, which was more than most people get for free before 10 in the morning. 2 nights a month, irregular but stubborn, the printer in 5B came alive at 2:17 and printed names from when the room was an office, and the office took cash, and the cash came with a handshake, and sometimes a song. Housekeeping had tried unplugging it, but the little machine held on to its paper and its green light like a dog holds a ball. Engineering had replaced it with a new unit. The new unit learned the trick too, as if the wire in the wall had a voice. Once, a manager put the printer in another room. It printed in the other room. At 2:17, Vesper asked the question an auditor would ask, "Why 2:17?" Quill lifted a shoulder. Night audit on the old system rolled at 2. The manager, a woman named Adelaine Merritt, he wrote in her diary, he gestured toward the wall where black and white photos of the old Francis hung in frames. The audit took 17 minutes most nights because the room charge calculation was slow. He winked, a habit to soften hard edges. That's what the Haunted History Tour says anyway. My grandmother worked housekeeping here in the 60s. She said Adelaine was the kind of woman who could silence a room by looking at a clock. Quill slid the strip back to Vesper. I don't put much stock in anything that prints on its own. But I don't stay in 5B either. She laughed, but softly. I'm the right kind of superstitious, she said. The kind that believes in loose cables and also in writing down names. She folded the strip, tucked it in her notebook, and promised the front desk a stronger signal on the north wing by supper. Work made the morning sensible. Vesper crawled into the equipment closet on 5, balanced her laptop on an inverted bucket, and watched packets move in tidy lines across her screen. The Scissortails network roamed like a polite guess slow if you needed it to be fast. Fast if you weren't asking. She pushed a firmware update, tuned channel widths, stood on a chair to re-angle a ceiling antenna the way you point your head to listen better. Lunch came from a food truck with a chalkboard menu and a line that made the air smell like cilantro and good intentions. She ate on the loading dock, the sun finding her cheekbones and telling her to stop worrying about things no one pays you to worry about. The second night, the printer coughed at 2:17 on the dot. The room's clock, which she had not trusted since it flashed 12:12 after she plugged her phone charger, matched her wristwatch exactly. The printed strip listed names again, 5 this time, each with a rate that made the era plain. Miguel Corrado, Della and Sten Bay, Bellamy H. Cross, Traveling Sales, G. Whitlow. The comments field sometimes added a phrase that felt like a quotation. Traveling with songbooks, baby sleeps light, keep the radio low. She tore the strip and laid it beside the previous one. The heater ticked its approval. She sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, the printer's power cord draped across her thigh. If it's a room ghost, she murmured, it should ignore me. If it's a network ghost, I may as well listen. Her laptop saw the printer as a simple thing on the subnet, a networked ticket device with a default login and a queue history that should have been empty and wasn't. Vesper scrolled. A job log rolling back months logged exactly 2 entries each night with the flag source, Legacy. Someone had written a silly little module into the Scissortails aging property management system, a module that echoed old file structures for nostalgia tours during October. She'd seen that kind of thing done for fun. But this module contained descriptors she didn't recognize. Ledger spool, carriage return key, ribbon jam. These were words from a different machine. The audit program triggered at 2. The ghost queue called itself at 2:17. She checked where it pointed. The path wasn't a path, it was a device ID that didn't match any modern naming scheme. She pinged the device. No answer. She traced the MAC. The vendor code came back to a company that died before the internet had central registration. That made her skin feel too tight. In the morning, white coffee cups clacked, and the lobby television played low, the weatherwoman pointing at a band of storms where storms like to form. Vesper asked Quill if there were schematics for the old building. He pointed to the office behind the desk. Ground plan framed on the wall. Maybe useful. The hotel had been 2 buildings stitched at the seam. The Francis Motor Lodge on the east, a narrower annex that used to be a savings bank on the west, joined by a flyover corridor at 3 and a clumsy arch at 5. Room 5B sat where the old bank manager's office once had been, according to a penciled note at the edge of the plan. There, a scrawl, printer niche, in lighter pencil, spare line to basement. Quill warmed to the problem the way night auditors do when daylight invites them to be citizens. He called maintenance. A man named Orson arrived in a polo with his name stitched in blue and a toolbox that had its own opinions. Together, they moved the desk in 5B 6 inches and then 3 and exposed a painted-over conduit hole at the baseboard with a thumb-width chase running down into the wall. Orson whistled between his teeth. "That's no Romex. That's armored cable from a generation that believed steel could keep time." He tapped the baseboard with the handle of his screwdriver. It answered with the hollow ring of an old closet. In the basement, they found the closet where the spare line went to not exactly die. The air was colder down there, humid the way the past is humid. A metal cabinet stood against the wall, padlocked, a gray panel humming like a neighbor practicing scales. Orson tested the lock with a pick he swore he hadn't lost. The door swung open. Inside, another little printer sat, twin to the one upstairs, its power indicator dark, its paper roll neat as a submitted term paper. A thin cable ran from a bracket down into a conduit box with 2 stories to tell. One was modern CAT cable, patched to the scissortails switch. The other looked like fabric-insulated wire on lead. Orson touched it with reverence and withdrew his hand. "You shouldn't be alive," he murmured to the box. Then he turned to Vesper. "Want me to pull the breaker for this room tonight at 2:15? See if it stops." She shook her head before she quite knew why. The motion felt rude. "Let me listen once more," she said. "Then, if it's a loop, we cut it." The third night, nothing is supposed to happen. Patterns prefer 3 as a way to make you distrust them. Vesper made tea in the room kettle with the cinnamon packet Quill had sworn by. She texted her brother a photo of the printer and a caption that read, "Haunted Bar Bill." And he sent back the shrug emoji that meant, "I love you, but weirdness is your brand." At 2:17, the printer began, but this time the sound rode a breath of air cold enough to raise her arm's small hairs. She stood close enough for the paper to curl against her knuckles and read each line as it arrived. Check-in, Adelaine Merritt. Rate, comp, room, 5B. Arrival, the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, night audit. She reached for the strip and her fingers trembled, mildly, like a person handed the microphone at a small funeral. The machine whirred without printing for a count of 6, then resumed, the font just a touch lighter. Check-in, Quince Palmer. Rate, $9.50. Room, 309. Arrival, the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, meeting at dawn. The room held its usual choir, fridge, heater, hallway, ice machine. 2 turns down, but behind it all, she heard a soft clicking. Not printer, not clock. Keys. The slow press and release of typewriter keys. Somewhere not in the room and not far enough away. She froze, because freezing is a way of letting more senses work. Her body made itself a listening instrument. The keys whispered. Again, 3 strokes. Pause. 2. The printer spit a final line. End of ledger. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes, M. Vesper did what the body asks. She sat on the bed with the strip in her lap and waited for her breath to level. It did. The heater ticked, the fridge purred, the typewriter stopped pretending, the sound folded itself up and slid under the door. She slept because being a person who works with systems means you've learned to stack your fear on a shelf when there's nothing urgent to do with it. Morning turned the printer into a device again. She took the strip down to the desk. Quill stared at the word comp and the name he had heard his grandmother say on summer porches when the heat wanted out of the day. He asked to borrow the strip to show his manager, a woman with the fast walk gait of someone who plans 2 days all the time. The manager's name was Letha Croft, and she looked at the strip like a problem that could be solved with a memo. She was polite and firm. "We have tours on Fridays for the people who want goosebumps," she said. "We prefer to keep the goosebumps from rewriting our Google reviews." Vesper smiled, a tight little smile that said, "I won't post, I don't do that work, I just want to know what the wire knows." Letha sighed. The Scissor Tale was a college internship that never ended for her. The building was her thesis. She pointed at the framed photo behind the desk. Adelaine Merritt, hair pinned like a decision, stood at a wooden desk the size of a Buick, hand on a ledger book, face turned to a camera that had learned to respect her. The caption read, "Francis Motor Lodge, C1959, Night Manager." Letha lowered her voice. Family lore says Adelaine died at her desk in 2003 after the building had been empty 6 years because she refused to move a box when the bank wanted it. The family had the key to the back door from the old days. She snuck in sometimes to straighten things that did not require her. A neighbor saw her light. By the time anyone checked, the coffee had gone cold and she'd written the date on a yellow legal pad with a line under it, like an anchor. I don't know if the story is true. I do know names have a way of using rooms until you say them out loud and then they rest. That afternoon, Vesper sat on the floor of 5B with her laptop and a coil of patience. She sniffed the packets between server and printer and saw the little ghost job present a string of bytes at 2 minutes past 2, announce itself as ready at 2:16, and request the queue at 2:17 with a line that included a date spelled in words, not numbers. October 12. She set a capture to record it tonight. She did not know what she would do with the proof, but the act of capturing felt like putting a box around a wild thing without requesting its death. The fourth night, she did not sleep. At 2:16, the room gathered itself. At 2:17, the printer began. The first name landed like a quiet gavel, Harlan Rowe. Again, as if the ledger wanted to list the set that belonged with the date, as if the building had a playlist for that night and needed it to end correctly. The second name, Odetta Meyer. The third, Quince Palmer. The machine word, then it printed a line that wasn't a line she understood. Checkout, A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. Balance, $0. Drawer, locked. The room changed temperature by a needle's width. The way a body registers changes a thermostat does not. The typewriter sound returned, louder, as if the keys had moved closer, as if someone had rolled the desk chair to the doorway. Vesper stood. The bathroom light made a rectangle on the carpet. She turned it off and let the room be only the room. In the dark, a kind of courtesy arrived. She spoke to the space like a person speaks to a skittish animal. "I hear you," she said softly. "I see what you print. If you're finishing something, finish. If you need a witness, I'm here." The keys worked once, gently. The printer fed a final inch and stopped. The heater clicked off as if called on. The fridge made a small, delighted sound, the way fridges do when they extract a victory from physics. Vesper lay down slowly, like a person trying not to wake a toddler, and watched the window make a square on the wall. She did not sleep much. She did not feel punished by that. On Friday, Quill called his grandmother. She came in with a smile that wore 80 years as if they were a favorite cardigan. Her name was Thalia Penner. She had hands that did hair buns right the first time and eyes that counted change without looking. She stood in 5B and curtsied to the air, lightly, like a joke only the past finds funny. She pointed at the baseboard where the printer niche had been long before this printer knew it was one. And she told a story the way people in the middle of the country tell them, in straight lines, with pauses for the parts that don't quite behave. Back when the Francis was a stop on the oilfield run, she said, Adelaine kept books for men who couldn't read receipts and kept rooms for women who didn't need to be asked why they traveled alone. She printed the audit every night, tore the strip, tucked it under the ledger ribbon, and locked the drawer. Her niece said she was proud of how long she could do the math in her headroom tax, city tax, discount for the flood man whose boots never dried. When the hotel closed in 1997, Adelaine kept a key. In 2003, she came in one last time to make the numbers even. She wrote the date, she drew a line. She put her hand to her chest like she was looking for a pen and fell as neat as folding a shirt. The firemen took 10 minutes to arrive. I put flowers on the door, and then the bank put a new lock on the door, and then time put dust on the lock and years on us all. Thalia reached out and touched the printer as if it were the hem of a dress in a department store window. Adelaine believed in drawers that closed, she said. It sounds like over again at 2:17, she gets to do that part, finish the roll, tuck it in, say goodnight to accounts. She is the kind of woman who would find that worth doing. Vesper spent Saturday building a workaround that no manager had asked for and no ghost could be fooled by. She pre-programmed a rule in the printer's network profile. At 2:16, the device would capture its own print job to a text buffer and email it to a special address she made for the Scissortail historian. Proof for people, paper for the room. At 2:15, she and Orson stood in the basement closet like two burglars having second thoughts. Orson touched the breaker switch. He looked at her. She did not nod. He did not flip it. Upstairs in 5B, the printer coughed, purred, and worked. Down here, the old gray panel vibrated, soft as sleep. At 2:20, Vesper's email pinged her phone with a single message. Subject, ledger. Body, 3 lines. Names, rates, the comp, the sign-off. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. She did not sleep that night. She didn't mind. She lay on the bed, hands behind her head, and watched the room recede from what rooms are in daylight containers, shelves, angles, and become what rooms are when you let them be churches. Limits, repetition, silence between notes. She thought about drawers, about the way her work was mostly closing things in the right order so strangers could open them and recognize what they saw, about how a hotel is a machine for forgiving you for not being home. On Sunday, she checked out. She left a thank you envelope at the desk with Quill's name written in neat engineer's block. In it, a printout of the email rule and a small drawing she'd made of the baseboard hole with an arrow labeled here, "The wire remembers." Quill held the envelope like it might be heavier than it was. Letha met her at the door. "I can't exactly put this in a maintenance request," she said, meaning the week Vesper had just spent listening to a machine be more honest than any of them owed their jobs. "But I can tell you what we can do. We can frame a copy of your email in the staff room and call it the drawer letter. We can show it to anyone who works past midnight and forgets that ending is a kindness. We cannot run a Halloween promo in 5B because some stories don't belong to customers. We cannot unplug the thing that works for someone who isn't here anymore." Vesper smiled. That's more than most places do for the living. She drove out of Tulsa with the radio off, south, then east, then north again, the planes rolling around her like a low lullaby. She stopped at a gas station where the coffee was too strong and therefore perfect. She called her brother to tell him a story with no real twist and therefore true. She didn't say the name of the printer because sometimes a tool deserves privacy. She didn't say the name of the woman who closed drawers because she had said it enough. She didn't say 2:17 because she had learned to say it in her head as a kind of vow to be kind to the people who work at that hour. Months later, back in Tulsa for a different job in a different building, she walked past the Scissortail one evening just before Christmas when the lobby held a neighbor party. A small tree wore strands of tickets in place of garland bar tabs printed for fun, red inked with dates and little notes in flare pen script. Quill waved from the desk, a Santa hat angled to keep his dignity. Letha stood by the fireplace talking to a city inspector whose expression said he had learned to sleep at last. On the stair, a woman in her 50s, adjusting an ugly sweater, looked at Vesper in that way strangers sometimes look at one another, as if they had agreed to be in the same hallway before they were born. Vesper stopped in for a minute. She drank cider from a paper cup. She left before anyone could ask for a funny story with a good ending. She slept at a chain hotel by the interstate where the printer in the lobby spat bills for bottled water and where midnight meant nothing in particular. At 2:17, she woke and smiled at the ceiling, not because any machine had called to her, but because she had trained her body to stand witness for a time that belongs to other people. She poured water into a glass and listened to the small sound it made when it met the bottom, hollow turning to full. She said the name she had been given as if returning a borrowed book. She slept again. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room and a device on the desk prints at a time that sounds like a secret, do what Vesper did. Don't yank the cord. Don't film it for the internet like proof is a currency and this is your chance to spend. Sit up, put your feet on the rug, read the names if names arrive. If you can, make a rule that gives the living something to hold a copy, a note, an email to a person whose job is to remember. Then, let the room have its paper. Let the drawer close. Say thank you to the time that isn't yours. The night staff everywhere will feel it like a hand they don't have to see. And if you must know, it goes like this. The little green light winks, the paper unfurls. The names Harlan, Odetta, Quince, Adeline roll by, small and austere and whole. The room changes by a breath, the heater stands down, the fridge on duty hums, the typewriter in the wall or the idea of a typewriter slides one last carriage to the right and returns. The drawer locks. The ledger for that one night balances again. You will not have been asked to fix anything. You will not have been asked to believe. You will have been asked to witness. A job that counts. When dawn smears light along the window, when the city yawns and rolls, when the night auditor hands the keys back to daytime and goes home to sleep in a room with a plant that knows their voice, you will have been part of the smooth that makes this complicated world possible. Somewhere, a printer coughs once more, polite as always, and waits another 24 hours to do what it knows on the dot without apology. If, later, someone asks why a small hotel on North Boston Avenue keeps a finicky old ticket machine in a room that could rent for $2 more without it, you can say this. Not every device has to justify itself in money. Sometimes a machine is a ritual. Sometimes a ritual is a receipt that proves someone was here and did their work and went to sleep. And sometimes, at 2:17 in the morning, a woman who once locked a drawer she loved gets to do it again, which is as reasonable a reason as any you'll hear for anything that persists in this country, shaped by roads, rooms, ledgers, and the soft insistence of people who finish what they start. The call came in on a Tuesday at 4:32 in the afternoon, late October. The sun already sliding behind the Blue Ridge, so the hollows of Shenandoah darkened early. Ranger Aislinn Keats was parked at mile marker 47 of Skyline Drive, just north of the Rapidan turnoff, a paper cup of station coffee cooling in the cup holder, and her radio tuned to the quiet channel they used for backcountry check-ins. The speaker breathed. Static arranged itself into a voice that did not sound like any of her crew. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Aislinn turned the volume wheel a notch. Out the windshield, the ridge was drawn in crosshatch, oaks and hickories going copper, the sky a pale thing you could scratch with your nail. The voice came again, precise, as if it were reading off a card. Fox Hollow base to any unit on the east slope, child missing, male, age 8, name Harlan Whitcomb, last seen near the Old Stone Spring House above Corbin Run, weather degenerating, Hurricane Hazel expected to push in, winds rising, request all available, time is 16:30, October 14, 1954. The radio clicked off into snow. Then, faintly, the same message, identical down to the breath before the name. Aislinn stared at the handset. Their base was called Piney River Dispatch. Their tower names were Pinnacles and Hazeltop and Big Meadows. No one in the park had used Fox Hollow for decades. Her training cracked its knuckles. She keyed the mic. Piney River to unknown unit. Say again. Who is calling Fox Hollow base? Silence laid itself over the car like a thin blanket. Beyond the glass, a crow moved from one bare snag to another as if demonstrating a diagram. The wind was a steady push from the southeast. Hazel. The word gave the hairs on Aislinn's arms ideas. She stepped out and let the door swing shut. The air had that warm edge you get before a storm that started somewhere else. Leaves chased each other along the asphalt, then lay down. In the trunk lay her day pack, a spare radio, and a copy of a paper map creased along the places everyone folds them. She slung the pack, checked battery levels, turned the spare to scan. The main radio kept its sulk. The spare found chatter from Big Meadows about a flat tire near Lewis Mountain, then returned to quiet. The old voice did not return. Aislinn keyed in to dispatch. Piney, Keats at 47. I caught a transmission, sounds like a vintage call. Reference to Fox Hollow, child missing near Corbin Run, date October 14, 1954. Could someone check the archive on that, see if we have a historical incident report? The dispatcher was a steady woman named Karen, who did not make noises she did not need. Copy, Aislinn. Stand by. Aislinn leaned on the hood and looked east, where the hills tumbled like knuckles, all green and copper and shadow. She had worked Shenandoah 5 seasons. She knew the way the ridges spoke when you asked them right. She also knew radios lie sometimes, bouncing off ducts of temperature and skipping across layers of ionized air like stones. She had heard voices from fire towers that had been torn down before she was born, and a farmer yelling to his brother on a frequency no longer assigned to anyone. She had never heard a date pinned to a hurricane whose name lived in the county's memory like a scar. Karen came back. We have a typewritten Keats, Incident 1954-H, filed at Piney River. Hurricane Hazel, multiple rock slides, a missing person in the Corbin area, that name you gave. It is a cold file. It does not say recovered. I repeat, not recovered. No remains located. Not closed. Aislinn pressed the radio to her shoulder until the plastic complained. Copy. Can you send scans to my phone? I'm heading down to the Corbin Run access. If anyone else is close enough to meet, let them know. There was a pause, a little breath that was not static. Karen's voice softened a shade, the way people do when the past finds a way to ask for your time. Sending now. Watch your footing, the trails are a mess of marbles with the leaves down. Want Dupre from Hazeltop on, stand by. Affirmative. Aislinn slung the pack across her back and looked once more at the ridgeline. A truck from Fleet rumbled past, the driver lifting 2 fingers off the wheel in that rural benediction. Clouds had started as a rumor and were now themselves. The Corbin Run access was a gravel pull-off hidden beneath tulip poplars that had learned to whisper. Aislinn eased the truck in sideways and cut the engine. She took the trail with her boots, making small promises to each rock. The stream voiced itself down the hollow knit of last week's rain and this afternoon's melt of a single stubborn snowpatch in a shadow under a ledge. The map told the story of the lower springhouse, a square of stones where water had been convinced to behave. Above it, a ledge with a scatter of quartz chips, the leftovers of older hands doing older work. Aislinn kept an ear on her radio and the other on the creek. She caught the place where trail forgets itself and becomes deer. She found the old springhouse, its stones asking to be counted. She touched the edge of the low wall with the kind of gentleness reserved for quilts and engines. She did not say the boy's name. The afternoon pulled its shoulders in. The radio breathed again. Same cadence, same careful voice. Fox Hollow base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near Stone Springhouse above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Request all available. Time is 16:30. October 14, 1954. Aislinn shivered in the warm air. Her eyes went to the springhouse and its square of shadow. She moved the beam of her headlamp across the stones, not because she expected to see anything, but because light can sometimes rewrite a sentence the land is trying to say. The beam found a length of rust, half buried in the moss, along the back of the foundation, thin as a butter knife, with a clip and a circle at one end. She crouched. A whistle. Army surplus, by the look of it. She teased it free, the moss unwilling to let it go. The metal had pitted and softened into a river-colored thing. She wiped it once against her sleeve, then regretted the act. Her radio clicked and made a sound she had not heard in years. A squelch from another era. Karen came back on. Keats. Dupre is on the way from Hazeltop Tower, 20 minutes if the drive is kind. Archives show the boy was last seen by his father near the springhouse, yes. The father left him to fetch his jacket from the car. Weather shifted, heavy gust pushed through, child gone when he returned. Tracks lost near the ledge above the run. 2 days of cruise, then Hazel brought the flood and they stood them down. The file has letters from the mother, 2 years after, asking if anyone found anything she could hold. Answer stamped no. Aislinn looked at the whistle in her hand, then at the spring that fed the run. The water wore a sheen of leaves thin enough to count. She keyed the mic. Found a whistle near the spring house. Will bag it. Doubt it has any forensic value after 6 decades, but a photograph might matter to someone. As she spoke, a figure eased out of the trees upstream. A man in the brown and green of a ranger uniform, but the cut of it was wrong in a way you can feel even if you do not have the words. The shirt had pockets like ideas, the hat sat stiff as a rule book, he carried a strap radio that looked like a lunch pail with an antenna. He exhaled, then stopped when he saw her. "Ma'am," he said. There was a formality in the syllables, like church on a day that hurt. "We're sweeping the east slope." The boy's father said he was right here. He pointed at the stones, as if pointing could anchor the earth. Aislinn stood very still. The man's face had the smoothness of someone who had not yet had reason to learn what whiskey was for. His name tag said M. Elwood. His shoulder patch bore an American shield with a tree she did not recognize. He glanced down at her radio and then at the whistle in her hand. "You with us?" he asked. "You with Fox Hollow?" Aislinn's throat did the dry swallow of a person whose mind is faster than her words. "Yes," she said, because yes was easier than telling a man with a lunch pail radio about the word digital. "I heard your call." "Where are your lines?" "At the ridge," he said, puzzled by the question. "We got men cutting sign along the deer trails. We got women at base keeping track of names. The disaster man out of Charlottesville told us Hazel will give us until dawn and then gone." He looked past her to the ledge, his jaw a small square against the warm air. "Mother is at the church in Syria, not the far one, the one with the bell rope that sticks. She keeps asking if he had a jacket. She wants the question to be a fact." A gust moved through the trees on some business of its own. Aislinn felt the air change around the bones of the rocks. The man looked at her again, and the little muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched. "Your radio," he said. "You get this out to anyone else." "Yes." "We have a tower at Hazeltop. They know. Someone is coming." "Good," he said softly. Then he put 2 fingers to his brow, an old salute done halfway because distance is difficult to respect when the ground is asking for more of you. He stepped past her, boots exact on the damp leaves, and moved toward the ledge, listening with his face. He put a hand out as if to feel a draft. His outline lightened as if the warm air had decided he belonged to it. The forest made the sound of a coat hem brushed along a pew. He was gone. Aislinn stood, her hands empty now that the whistle had weight inside a bag. She did not call after him because naming a thing makes it pick a room and leave all the others. She climbed the slope above the spring house, careful, testing each foot. The ground showed her where it had let go before. The soil had slumped sometime between 1954 and now a scar that trees had tried to stitch. She scoped along the edge and thought about the father leaving for a jacket, a boy with a whistle and a spring that talks even when wind tells it not to. Dupre's SUV nosed into the pull-off as the last of the light left, and the storm made its speech. Jericho Dupre had shoulders like a doorframe and a way of stepping onto ground as if asking permission. He carried 2 headlamps and a calm that turned wind into a task rather than a threat. "You heard it too," he said, by way of greeting. "I did, twice. Then it came again down at the spring house. I found this." She held up the bag. The whistle swung on its string, dull as an old firmament. He took the bag and looked as if it could tell him how to think. He listened. The wind pushed down the hollow. The radio hissed, then thought better of it. He nodded at the ledge. "If it were mine to write," he said, "I would say, slip." The file says gusty before Hazel. A child with a small sense of infinity walks the line twice to see if the sound changes along the water. It does. He steps where the deer stepped, and the hill remembers it owes the river a favor. Aislinn told him about the ranger with the lunch pail radio. Jericho had been in the park long enough to have a story for everything and to respect none of them fully. Fox Hollow was an unofficial name for the old maintenance yard near Syria in the 50s. He said, the way a person does when they are agreeing with the possibility of a ghost to be polite. There is a cinder pad there with the marks of 4 posts, like a tower. The radios would have been handsets the size of a Bible that could make clouds sound like news. People back then wrote reports thick with nouns. They did not trust adjectives unless a man had bled. He held the bag with the whistle for an extra breath. He set it in his crew pocket. They searched until rain made the ground decide to be a different kind of ground. In light from their headlamps, the trees stood at attention, counseling caution. They ran a short line grid above the ledge, more to be able to say they had used the dark well than because they expected the earth to give up a long-ago truth for free. At 9, the radios called them home before the lightning made the argument personal. Karen met Aislinn at the office with a printout. The file had been scanned, crooked, and the edges were black, where the copier had tried to keep history from fraying. The incident commander's name was printed in a firm hand, M. Elwood. A note in the margin had been added later in pencil. Mother moved to Luray in '67, father deceased, no closure letter sent. The pencil note was signed with a small initial A and a dot. Aislinn slept at the bunkhouse with the radio on her nightstand like a dog. She dreamed that paper flapped along a clothesline strung between trees, and she walked the line, reading every letter, her feet lined up on the rocks of the run, the paper turning to leaves as she read. At 3 in the morning, she woke to the noise a storm makes when it finally accepts its job. The world beyond the window went white, then black, then white again. She turned the volume down to half. She watched the rain write gloss on the sill. The radio stayed quiet. At 10, the day pulled itself together into rags. Aislinn drove down to Luray to a blue house where the porch had a swing, and the swing had 2 cushions that had learned how to be rain. She had a name from the file and a phone number that still worked, to her surprise. A woman in her 80s opened the door with the careful welcome reserved for officials who might be good news or could be kind even if they were not. "I am Aislinn Keats," she said, ranger with Shenandoah. "I am here because a storm pulled a thread and we saw where it ran." The woman corrected her posture and straightened the collar of her cardigan as if a story would take her picture. "My name is Tilda Whitcomb," she said. "We did not know how to leave him there, so we stayed. I have a loaf of banana bread that forgot the raisins on purpose if you are the kind of visitor who does not mind crumbs." Aislinn sat at a round table so clean it looked like a rule. The banana bread was honest, the tea was strong. Tilda put her hand on the tablecloth and kept it there as if the cloth would be steadier if it knew she was not going anywhere. She said the name Harlan like a stake you drive into ground so the tent knows where to stand. "He whistled 3 notes, Tilda said. "The tune the train plays when it comes into Luray, because his father used to take him to the crossing, and they would wave at the men who stand like saints. 3 notes, and then he would laugh, because he was practiced at laughing. The wind took the notes and did not give them back. My husband ran to the car, and the sky changed. They told him on the radio he had until morning. You can live your whole life in a sentence like that." Aislinn put the bagged whistle on the table. The string looped like a sleeping thing. Tilda did not reach for it. She looked at it as one looks at an old photograph that has learned how to move. "I did not get a letter," she said, and smiled small to prove she was not accusing. "I understand how papers behave. I was a clerk before my hands forgot to love the carbon paper. I suppose I wrote a letter in my head every day for 2 years. Then I stopped asking out loud. You cannot keep asking the same question without turning into a different person." The whistle sat, silent, older than most of the kitchen. Tilda looked out the window, and the window looked back. A red cardinal landed on the feeder and told everyone, rudely, that it had arrived. Tilda laughed at the bird, and the laugh made her look like a photograph of herself. Aislinn asked about the ranger named Elwood. Tilda's eyes softened. "Martin Elwood went to our church," she said. "He was the kind of man who knocked on the door with his hat in both hands. He brought us a bag of oranges at Christmas and apologized as if the oranges had failed to be children. He wrote the report because that is what he could do, and he built a cinder block box for the tower that was not a tower, and then he got quiet, like men do, when they find out the world can keep a thing from them and they still have to go to work. Back in the truck, Aislinn let the radio hum. Big Meadows asked Pinnacles to send a set of cones to mile marker 62. A bear stared down a minivan with an intensity that made the parents breathe like swimmers. Life had resumed its insistence. She turned the truck toward the old maintenance yard near Syria, the one Jericho half remembered as a place with 4 posts and a name more rumor than rule. There was a cinder pad there for sure, now half invaded by chickweed and ambition. Someone had collected beer cans along the edge and arranged them by brand into a timeline. Aislinn walked the perimeter and crouched at a corner where the concrete had spalled enough to show a rebar smile. She brushed the dirt aside with one hand. A penny lay there. The year was 1954. She laughed, because a park and a story will sometimes give you too many symbols and you have to choose which to be corny about. The wind rose toward evening. The radio stayed in this decade, obedient and dull. Aislinn drove the ridge road, watching the color slide toward Bruce. Back at the office, Karen handed her a thin envelope with a stamped return address that made Aislinn's scalp feel like it had learned something. It was from an amateur radio club in Harrisonburg, a man who had heard the show Aislinn, sometimes called During Slow Nights, the one where listeners told stories of radios hearing the wrong things on purpose. "We pick up oddities when the weather steeps the air," the man had written. "Old distress calls, ham tests bounced off airplane wings, bombers from the 40s practicing." Once, a train dispatch from 1960 rolled through on a rain so thick you could chew it. There are names for this, and none of them explain it. The way I think of it is this: time breathes shallow near storms. If a voice was loud enough once, and the same air returns, you might hear a ghost that is not a ghost. Not dead, not alive, just not finished talking. That night, Aislinn drove down to Corbin Run one last time with a single job. She stood by the spring house and held the whistle. She did not put it to her lips because it belonged to a mouth that had done its work. She set it on the stone in the square of water smell and said a sentence Tilda had given her permission to say. "Harlan, your mother sits with a red bird and forgives the form and the weather. We leave you where you are, not lost now. We know the place that held you. We will name it even if the stone refuses to." Thunder argued with a ridge to the west. Aislinn picked up the whistle, tucked it back into the bag, and snapped the bag shut the way you close a letter you cannot ignore any longer. Her radio breathed and then found words. "Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Search secured. Weather has moved us. We will resume when it lets us. Families headed to shelter. If anyone finds a whistle, mark the spot. End of report, October 14, 1954. Aislinn lifted the handset to her mouth and did not speak. The silence she chose felt like respect, not fear. She held the radio until the voice faded into the music of rain. Then she climbed the hill back to the truck. The park wrote its own ending. Winter stripped the ridge to bones. Spring came with its first honest green.